In February of 1981, the President of the United States stood in the courtyard of the Pentagon. He turned to the press and he said something strange. He told them, "You are going to hear something you would not believe if it were a script." Then he read the citation out loud himself. The man standing beside him had been zipped into a body bag 13 years earlier. He was an orphan, a migrant farm worker, a boy who quit school at 15. Doctors had told him he would never walk again, and he was standing there. Most people know one part of this story, the 6 hours, but Roy Benavidez fought 3 wars. That is the title of the book he wrote himself, and then he fought a 4th one that almost nobody talks about. This is all of it. He was born Raul Perez Benavidez in Cuero, Texas, in August of 1935. His father was a Mexican farmer. His mother was Yaqui. It was the Depression, and South Texas was one of the poorest places in America. When Roy was about 2 years old, tuberculosis killed his father. 5 years later, the same disease killed his mother. By the age of 7, he was an orphan. He and his younger brother Roger were taken in by their grandfather, an uncle, and an aunt in El Campo. They were raised alongside 8 cousins in a house with no room to spare. There was no money. There was work. He shined shoes at the local bus station for whatever people would give him. He worked in a tire shop when a tire shop needed hands. And when the harvest came, the family followed it. Cotton in Texas, sugar beets in Colorado, fields in New Mexico. Picking cotton is not romantic work. You drag a canvas sack down a row in the heat until the sack outweighs you. Children did it alongside adults because the family was paid by the pound. And this was Texas in the 1940s. A Mexican-American kid learned young which doors he could walk through and which he could not, which schools, which counters, which side of town. He was called names for the way he looked and the way he spoke, and he learned to fight about it. At 15, he dropped out of school entirely to work full-time and help feed the family. He could barely read. Nothing about that boy suggested a Medal of Honor. That is exactly why the rest of this matters. In 1952, still a teenager, he joined the Texas Army National Guard. The country was at war in Korea. The Guard was a paycheck and a way out. For a kid with no diploma and no prospects, the Army was the first institution that ever offered him a future. In June of 1955, he went active duty in the regular Army. It gave him what El Campo never had: structure, a trade, a rank he could climb. In 1959, he married Hilaria Coy. Everyone called her Lala. She would spend the next 40 years as the other half of everything that happened to him. That same year, he volunteered for Airborne. Jump school is designed to make men quit. You run everywhere. You jump from towers. And then you stand in the open door of an aircraft and step out into nothing. He earned his wings and was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg. The shoeshine boy from El Campo was a paratrooper. To understand what he became, you have to understand what he was reaching for. The Special Forces were still new. President Kennedy had championed them. Their job was not to be an army. It was to go into a country in small teams and work with the people who lived there. A Green Beret detachment was 12 men, each with a specialty: weapons, demolitions, communications, medicine. Each man had to be able to do the other's jobs, because on those teams somebody always went down. They operated far from support, often for weeks, often alone. It was the hardest thing in the Army to get into. Benavidez wanted it, and in 1965, the Army sent him to Vietnam as an advisor. This is the part the famous videos skip entirely. Benavidez had a first tour 3 years before the one everybody knows. He was advising a South Vietnamese infantry regiment, walking their patrols, learning the country, and on one of those patrols, he stepped on a landmine. They carried him out. They flew him home. At Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, the doctors examined his spine and reached a conclusion: he would never walk again. They began preparing his medical discharge papers. For most men, that is where the war ends and the rest of a life begins. A wheelchair, a pension, a quiet exit at 29 years old. His wife was pregnant. He had no education to fall back on. Roy Benavidez decided that was not going to be the ending. What he did next, he described himself years later in his own words. Every night after the lights went down in the ward, he climbed out of his bed against doctor's orders, against medical advice, against the paperwork already being typed. He could not use his legs, so he used his elbows and his chin. He dragged his own body across the floor to a wall beside the bed. The other men in that ward were awake, and they were watching him. Many of them were permanently paralyzed. Many of them were missing limbs. They could not do what he was attempting. And every night they encouraged him to keep trying. He propped himself against that wall, and he started with his toes, just moving them, proving something was still connected, then his feet, then pressing his ankles against the floor, then trying to force his own weight up a wall on legs that would not answer him. By his own admission, it went on for months, and it often left him in tears. He was hospitalized for more than a year. And in July of 1966, Roy Benavidez walked out of that hospital on his own legs, with his wife beside him. Here is the detail that almost nobody tells you. He did not go home. He did not take the discharge. He was not finished. In 1967, the man doctors said would never walk again completed Special Forces selection. He trained as a weapons expert. He earned the Green Beret. He got himself assigned to the 5th Special Forces Group, and then he went back to the war that had already broken him once. The unit he went back to was not a normal one. Detachment B-56 ran a program called Project Sigma. Sigma was long-range reconnaissance, small teams inserted by helicopter far beyond friendly lines. Their job was to find the enemy, not to fight him, to locate him, count him, and get out. They worked the country near the Cambodian border, where the North Vietnamese moved men and supplies south. These were the places the war was not officially happening. A recon team was typically a handful of Americans and a larger number of indigenous soldiers. They carried what they could and nothing they could not. If a team was compromised, there was no artillery umbrella and no cavalry over the hill. There were helicopters, and there was whatever the men on the ground could do until the helicopters arrived. That is the job. That is the context for everything that happened on the 2nd of May. And there is one more thing you need to know, because most retellings leave them out completely. 9 of the 12 men on that team were Montagnards. Montagnard means mountain people. They were the indigenous tribes of Vietnam's Central Highlands. They were not ethnically Vietnamese, and they had been treated as outsiders in their own country for generations. American Special Forces recruited them, trained them, armed them, and lived in their villages. And the Green Berets who fought beside them tended to trust them completely. They knew the terrain. They could move through jungle that swallowed everyone else. When Roy Benavidez heard that team screaming on the radio, most of the voices were theirs. He did not go in for a squad of Americans, he went in for a team. On the morning of the 2nd of May, 1968, that 12-man team was inserted by helicopter west of Loch Ness. Their mission was to confirm large-scale enemy activity in the area. They confirmed it almost immediately. By most accounts, they had landed on the edge of a North Vietnamese force of roughly 1,000 men. The team called for emergency extraction within minutes. 3 helicopters went in to get them. All 3 were driven back by small arms and anti-aircraft fire. Roy Benavidez was at the forward operating base, listening to it happen over the radio. He heard men he knew calling for help that could not reach them. So when a helicopter turned around to try again, he got on it. He was not assigned to that mission. Nobody ordered him onto that aircraft. By his own account, he carried a knife and a medical bag. Nothing else. When the helicopter could not land, he jumped out of it while it was still hovering above the trees. Then he ran, roughly 75 meters, across open ground, toward the tree line. He was hit before he ever reached them. In the right leg, in the face, in the head. He got to the team anyway. Consider what that run actually was. 75 meters is the length of a football field, less a quarter. He crossed it in the open, in daylight, toward a tree line holding hundreds of men who were already firing at him. He was hit 3 times before he arrived, and he did not stop. 4 of them were already dead. That included the team leader. The rest were wounded and pinned and could not move to a pickup zone. So Benavidez took command of what was left of them. He redistributed ammunition. He passed out water. He called in airstrikes on positions almost on top of his own, and he began carrying wounded men, one at a time, toward the aircraft. Then he went back for the team leader's body, and for the classified documents the man was carrying. Those papers could not be left in that field. That is why he went back for them, and at that exact moment, the pilot of the extraction helicopter was mortally wounded, and the aircraft crashed. Their ride out was now a wreck on the ground. Benavidez, already shot through the leg, the face, and the head, went to the wreckage. He pulled the survivors out of the overturned aircraft. He organized them into a defensive perimeter in the open, and he held it. It was hit again. Small arms fire in the abdomen, grenade fragments in his back. He kept calling in airstrikes and kept moving between the wounded, distributing what ammunition was left. Then an enemy soldier came at him from behind and clubbed him to the ground. The official citation records the hand-to-hand fight that followed and additional wounds to his head and arms before he killed the man. By other accounts, he was bayoneted, pulled the blade out of his own body, and finished the fight with his knife. When a second helicopter finally made it in, he still did not get on it. He made one more trip back out into that field. He went to make sure every classified document had been recovered or destroyed, and to bring in the last of the wounded. Only then did he allow them to pull him aboard. The official citation states the result plainly. He saved the lives of at least 8 men. The men who were there have always called it 6 hours. What happened when they got him back is the part that made him a legend. By the time they unloaded him, he could not speak and he could not move. His eyes were crusted shut with his own blood. The doctor who examined him concluded he was dead. They began zipping him into a body bag, and Roy Benavidez, unable to make a sound, did the only thing he had left. He spat in the doctor's face. By his own account, he was wounded 37 times in that field. He would carry shrapnel in his heart and a punctured lung for the rest of his life. He spent nearly a year in hospitals. Again, and while he lay in that bed, something was happening outside the window. By 1968, America had turned against the war, not just against the policy, against the people sent to fight it. Benavidez said later that he watched it on the television in the hospital ward. Flags being burned, coverage that treated the men in uniform as the problem. Vietnam veterans did not come home to parades. Many of them changed out of uniform in airport bathrooms so they would not be spoken to. They were told to keep it to themselves, and most of them did for decades. That is the country Roy Benavidez was recovering into. A man who had been shot through the face for a team of Montagnard tribesmen, in a country that increasingly did not want to hear about any of it. And what makes him unusual is what that did to him. It did not make him bitter, it made him louder. For what he did that day, the Army gave him the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor, pinned on him by General William Westmoreland while he was still recovering. It should have been the Medal of Honor. The men who were there knew it. But the Medal of Honor is not an opinion. It is a legal standard. It requires incontestable proof. It requires a living eyewitness who watched it happen. And the Army believed there was not one. The men closest to him had been killed or evacuated. The paperwork stalled. So for 13 years, officially, it did not count. He went on with his life. He stayed in the Army. He was in constant pain. Then, in 1980, a man named Brian O'Connor picked up a newspaper. O'Connor had been the radio operator on that team. Benavidez had believed for over a decade that he was dead. He was not. He had been severely wounded, evacuated before anyone could fully debrief him, and had gone on with his own life. He was living in the Fiji Islands. He happened to be on holiday in Australia, and in an Australian newspaper, he read a reprinted story out of a small Texas paper about a Green Beret named Benavidez. O'Connor contacted him and submitted a 10-page account of everything he had watched that day. The missing eyewitness had found himself on the 24th of February 1981 in the inner courtyard of the Pentagon. President Reagan read the citation aloud. 13 years late, Roy Benavidez received the Medal of Honor. And here is the chapter almost no video will tell you. 2 years after the President of the United States put that medal around his neck, the government moved to take away his disability benefits. In 1983, the Social Security Administration was reviewing the disability rolls as a cost-cutting measure. Hundreds of thousands of Americans were re-examined to determine whether they were still too disabled to work. And the review determined that Roy Benavidez was shrapnel lodged in his heart and a punctured lung, in constant pain, was capable of finding employment. They moved to cut off payments he had been receiving since 1976. He could have handled it quietly. He was a national hero with the president's ear. Instead, he went public. And he said this, "I don't like to use my Medal of Honor for political purposes or personal gain, but if they can do this to me, what will they do to all the others?" That one sentence is the entire man. He was not fighting for his own check. He was fighting because he could see what was coming for people with no medal and no microphone. The story went national. Reagan was reported to be personally concerned. 10 days later, the government announced that the disability reviews would become more humane and compassionate. His benefits were restored, and he did not stop there. He became a spokesman for other disabled Americans who were losing theirs. That is the thing people miss about Roy Benavidez. The medal did not end his story. It gave him a microphone, and he spent 17 years using it. He traveled the country as one of the most sought-after speakers in America. Fortune 500 companies paid him to talk to their executives, military bases, civic organizations, veterans halls. But the audiences he actually cared about were schools, runaway shelters, and prisons. He talked to kids who were being written off exactly the way he had been, and what he told them over and over was to stay in school. The man who dropped out at 15 and could barely read spent the last part of his life on that one message. He wrote it down too, in a memoir he called The Three Wars of Roy Benavidez: the war in Vietnam, the war to walk again, and the war against the paperwork. His radio call sign in Vietnam was Tango Mike Mike. It stood for That Mean Mexican. It started as a nickname from the same men who would not have come home without him. Special Forces soldiers still say it today. On the 29th of November, 1998, Roy Benavidez died at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio. He was 63 years old. He was buried with full military honors at Fort Sam Houston National Cemetery, the same post where, 33 years earlier, doctors had written him off as a man who would never walk. In 2001, the United States Navy christened a ship the USNS Benavidez. More than a dozen places now carry his name: schools in Texas, an American Legion post in San Antonio, a recreation center in Eagle Pass, and a boot camp in Uvalde for exactly the kind of kid he used to be. There is one more thing worth sitting with. 8 men walked off that field because he would not stop going back for them. Those men went home. They had families. Their children exist. There are people alive today who never met Roy Benavidez and would not exist without him. That is the actual arithmetic of what happened west of Loc Ninh. And the Montagnards who fought beside him were largely abandoned when the war ended. Many were persecuted. Many fled. Their story is still mostly untold. He never stopped talking about them either. There is a footnote to the benefits fight that deserves to be the headline. Roy Benavidez was not the only one. Beginning in 1981, the government reviewed roughly 1.2 million disability cases. Between 1982 and 1984, it sent termination notices to nearly 500,000 Americans. Most of them had no medal. Most of them had no reporters returning their calls. But enough of them fought back, and enough people like Benavidez made noise that the country finally noticed. Courts began ruling against the reviews. States began refusing to carry them out. In 1983, the government suspended the reviews for mental illness. In 1984, it suspended them entirely. And then Congress did something it almost never does. It acted unanimously. The Social Security Disability Benefits Reform Act passed without a single dissenting vote. President Reagan signed it into law on the 9th of October, 1984. It changed the standard. The government could no longer cut a person off simply by deciding they looked employable. It now had to prove that their medical condition had actually improved. The burden of proof moved off the disabled citizen and onto the agency. That is still the law today. He asked what they would do to all the others. That question got answered by an act of Congress. And there is one more debt in this story, one that took even longer to pay. When Saigon fell in 1975, the Montagnards were left behind. They had fought alongside American Special Forces for a decade, and the new government knew exactly who they were. They were imprisoned. They were persecuted. Some of them were killed. Thousands fled into the jungles of Cambodia, where the Khmer Rouge hunted them too. For a decade, almost nobody in America knew or did anything about it. Then the Green Berets, who had served beside them, started making noise of their own. In 1986, the first 200 Montagnard refugees were brought to the United States. They were resettled in North Carolina, Raleigh, Greensboro, Charlotte. That was not an accident of paperwork. They were sent there because that is where the Special Forces veterans lived, around Fort Bragg. The men who had fought beside them made sure they had somewhere to land. Today, North Carolina holds the largest Montagnard population anywhere outside Vietnam, more than 12,000 people. 9 of the 12 men on that team west of Loc Ninh were Montagnard. Roy Benavidez never once let anybody forget it. People ask why this one soldier, out of millions who served, became a legend. It is not only the 6 hours. It is that an orphan who picked cotton and quit school at 15 was told he would never walk, and answered that by earning a Green Beret. It is that he climbed onto a helicopter he was not assigned to, for men who were not his responsibility. It is that he went back into that field a second time, and a third, for the wounded and for the paperwork. It is that he then had to fight his own government for 13 years to be recognized, and fight it again 2 years later just to keep what he had been given, and every single time he got back up. They zipped him into a body bag in 1968. He spent the next 30 years proving them wrong.